It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Governor Nathan Deal. Governor Deal's public service to his state spans 4 decades. He served in the U.S. Army at Fort Gordon in Augusta after graduating with a law degree from Mercer University, and then began a private law practice in Gainesville, the hometown of his wife, Sandra Deal. While his wife taught in Hall County Public Schools, the governor began a long span of service to his community as prosecutor, judge, state senator, and U.S. congressman. During his 17 years in Congress, Deal rose to chair of the Health Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce, where he became a noted expert on entitlement reform and healthcare policy. Nathan Deal took the oath of office as Georgia's 82nd governor on January the 10th, 2011. And just last year, under his leadership, Georgia was named the #1 place in the nation to do business. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the governor of our great state, Governor Nathan Deal.
Thank you for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be with you today. This is a great looking group. I thank you all for taking time to come and be here in your capital city while the General Assembly is normally in session. Now, just because they're not in session on the floor does not mean they're not working. There are a lot of things that are going on because we are rapidly approaching the so-called crossover day, in which legislation that originates in one house must have crossed over to the other house by next Monday. Is it Monday's crossover day? In order to be considered for final action this year. So a lot of people are working behind the scenes to try to make sure that their legislation is in a posture to be considered and hopefully finalized. So don't think that just because they're not on the floor up there that they're not busy doing the state's business. It's always a pleasure to be with the pharmacists, and especially to be here with you on Pharmacy Day. Jim Bracewell, your Executive Vice President, has been a good friend of mine for a long time and represents your industry very well, your profession, I should say, very well. I had the honor of appointing Jim to the Pharmacy Board last November, and I want to wish him the very best, as I understand he's going to be retiring perhaps later in the summer of this year. And certainly wish him the very best. But I know because I'm appointed to that board, I'm going to get a chance to stay in touch with him, and I thank you for that. I know that you know that your profession is one of the more important elements of the delivery of health care in this country. It has been elevated over the years, both in practical terms, but also in political reality. I was the Republican chairman of the House Subcommittee on Health when we passed Medicare Part D. I voted for that. It was, in my opinion, a very logical extension of what the federal government had committed itself to do with regard to Medicare for our senior citizens. We had been in a posture in this country in which, through Medicare, we were paying for doctor's visits, hospital visits, and many of the things that we had done historically that did not include pharmacy were all of a sudden out of sync with where the treatment of diseases had moved to. In fact, the most ironic example of that was a young man who had to have a replacement of one of his vital organs, and of course was required to take the anti-rejection drugs in order to make sure that the transplant was successful. But because he started back to work and was able to work part-time, his income eligibility became such that he could no longer have the governmental assistance for his medical payments to sustain the purchase of those anti-rejection drugs. And the answer that government gave him was this one. Well, we know that that expensive organ transplant that we paid for with taxpayer money is not going to be successful if you can't take the anti-rejection drugs and the organ fails. But take heart. The government will pay for another transplant. Now that was illogical to me. I think it's illogical in the minds of most people. So we, I think, took an appropriate step of making sure that we did not take health care to the edge of a crevice and not have the ability to help individuals beyond that point in time. Because as you know, more and more of the things that we have done through treatment in a doctor's office, maybe even surgical procedures, are now becoming unnecessary in light of the advancements of pharmaceuticals. And as pharmaceutical productions and research continues to evolve, I think we will continue to see that phenomenon continue. I know that we are fortunate here in the state of Georgia to have a new plant by Baxter Pharmaceutical, Baxter International, which is a major pharmaceutical producer, building the largest plant of its kind here in the state of Georgia. It is a biologics production facility. And as you know, that is apparently the new wave of where pharmaceuticals are moving to deal with even more difficult medical problems in the area of biologic production. We're just pleased to have a facility like that that's going to be coming online in the not too distant future right here in Georgia. But because of all of these evolutions in the pharmaceutical arena, it is important that you stay engaged with the political processes, both those here at the state level as well as those in Washington. You are fortunate that your profession has, I believe, 5 members of the General Assembly who are pharmacists by training and by practice in most cases. So you are very well represented. In fact, I'm told that's the largest number of pharmacists that any state has in its state legislative body. So they keep us all informed and make sure that your positions and your interests are very well represented. Now, I hope that you have an opportunity today to interact with some of these legislators, and there are several of them here at the table this morning. Those that perhaps may not be on the floor, many of them will be in their offices, and their staffs hopefully will be available to talk with you. You are, I think, in one of the most exciting professions that a young person can enter into. I congratulate you for your choice of a profession. I wish you well, and I want to make sure that as many of you as possible stay in the state of Georgia when you complete your educational requirements. We're going to need you. We have a growing population. We have an aging population. And all of that, I think, leads to a very fruitful future for anyone who pursues the profession of being a pharmacist. Thank you for inviting me to be with you this morning.